Hello, dear brothers and sisters. Today we will be discussing the next gospel that was read in the Orthodox Church, which was last Sunday. Last Sunday we read in the Orthodox Church a gospel that is one of those parts in the New Testament that we sometimes slide over. The New Testament, compared to the Old Testament, is not as legalistic. I would say it's not legalistic at all. In the Old Testament, we find that God gives humans commandments that have power of the law, that they have to be kept, otherwise God will erase them from His memory, that God will deny them His presence if they don't keep those commandments. In the New Testament, however, we find that everything is in a form of suggestion. Christ tells everyone to take as much as they can and increase it as they go by obeying the commandments that He gives. A perfect example for this kind of advice we find in relationship between John the Baptist and those who come to him. John, being the prodromos, the forerunner for Christ, passes on to those who come to him with a request of advice. He tells the soldiers who come to him not do more than they are commanded to do. In other words, he's telling them that what you do is not right, because they were occupying Israel. Then tax collectors come to him and he says to them, do not collect more than you are asked to. In other words, taxing so heavily people is not the right thing. But both the soldiers and the tax collectors were under a law, and they were under a certain government, and they were doing not their will, but the will of that particular government. Therefore, their sin was not necessarily their sin. But the sad part was that both the soldiers and the tax collectors were going beyond from what they were asked, and they were doing their own thing, and the soldiers were going further and making life harder for the citizens of that particular occupied country according to their desires, and also the tax collectors were collecting more than they were asked for their own pockets. John gives them the first step, because doing too much may bring us to an exhaustion, may bring us to a place where we give up because it's too much for us, too hard for us to do. However, when Christ gives such advice to people who surround Him, we see many of them not only follow the advice, but also they exceed, and they do many times more than Christ has asked them. And these kind of people become the champions of the faith. They have become the saints of the church, and they have become an example for all of us. In today's gospel, Christ is very strict. He says, either do this way or you are not acceptable. He tells them that whoever does not take their cross and follow Him is not worthy of Him. And taking a cross and following Christ means to put Christ first in every aspect of your life. In our liturgical life, we always proclaim, let us commend ourselves and one another and our whole life to Christ our God. When we say whole life, we should mean whole life. When we say whole life, does not mean partial, part of our life. It means all of our life, everything in our life. There shouldn't be anything that is outside of the boundaries of God's will. Because in the Lord's Prayer, that is the main prayer, and most Christians, all Christians I would say, use this prayer. We say, that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, everything happening on earth should be done according to your will. And when we commit ourselves and one another and our whole life to Christ, we are telling God that we are going to do everything according to your will. And that's why Christ says that you should take your cross and follow me. You should become my disciple. And every aspect of your life, you should do everything as if you were my disciple. And if you don't do so, that means that you are following something else. In another part of the Gospels, Christ says that one person cannot follow two masters. One master is demanding one kind of thing and the other master is demanding another kind of thing. If we follow one, we will hate the other, and if we love the other, we'll hate the first one. So we should choose one master and follow that master. And in this case, God is the master, because we ask Him to take care of us, and we tell Him that we desire that His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How is God's will in heaven? Everything in heaven, the heavenly creatures, all the angels, hosts of angels, clouds of angels, are continuously glorifying God. So in this particular case, when Christ is asking us to take our crosses and follow Him, in an indirect way, He is telling us that everything that we do in this world should be glorifying God. When we do things in order to glorify ourselves, people see fraud in it. They realize that we are egocentric, we're self-centered, and we don't do even for the community, but only for ourselves. But Christ is asking that we do everything for God, not even for the larger community, but for God. When we do everything for God, then everything that we do serves greater purpose, and it serves the larger community, it serves the community of our families, and it serves our personal needs. So we start from the higher level, the highest degree. When we serve God and we do everything for the glory of God, then everything comes down in a positive way for all levels of society, in all aspects of life. And that's what sometimes we misunderstand. In this particular gospel, Christ starts telling His disciples that they should leave everything and follow Him. They should leave their parents, they should leave their friends, brothers and sisters and children, and go after Him. This particular commandment is misunderstood even by the Christians. Some Christians understand this in a sectarian way, where when I ask somebody to leave everything and come after me, I make him my servant and he serves me only. That's not how it works in the realm of the church, in the realm of Christ. When Christ is asking His disciples to come and follow Him, He doesn't create a sect out of this. He does not exclude these people from the rest of the life, but simply He is asking them to become God's own. And becoming God's own means totally different than in our human society, when we own somebody's life, when we enslave somebody in any aspect of their life, emotionally, physically, psychologically. It does not compare to our understanding of following someone. When we follow Christ, it's totally different than we follow a human being. When we follow a human being, we submit ourselves to a human being, we serve His purposes. But Christ's purposes is our purposes. Christ is here to serve us. He is not coming as a king, He said, but He's coming as a servant. He bent down and washed the disciples' feet to show them that them following Him, He is becoming their servant. And this is a totally different dynamic for human mind. When you follow somebody, you serve them. But imagine if you followed somebody and he became your servant. In this case, that's what Christ is telling us. That if we leave everything in this world and we serve Him, He's going to become our servant. That by serving us, He's going to sanctify us. And in order to understand how this works, I will give you the example of the gifts that we give in the church. The highest form of the gift that we offer to God in the church is the bread and the wine. We bring bread and wine to the altar of Christ. And at one point in the liturgy, we tell Him that your own from your own we are offering to you. We elevate the gifts and symbolically give it to God. And God, taking those material things, the bread and the wine, sanctifies them, turns them into a holy thing, into the body and blood of Christ, and He returns them to us. So in this case, when Christ is asking us to leave everything and follow Him, He does not want to separate us from our relatives, from our children, from our parents, from our friends and relatives. But He wants us to be His own so that He can sanctify us and return us to the society that we belong, so that we will bring the holiness of God to the larger society, so that we will take care of our children as God's own, so that we will relate to our brothers and sisters as disciples of Christ, so that we will take care of our parents as God's servants. We will serve our parents as if they were God's own. And so this dynamic has to be clarified in our minds. Christ is not trying to separate us from our relatives. He does not want to take us away from them. But we can neither misunderstand or slide over this. Because when we misunderstand, then we are telling Christ that He is wrong, that He is telling us to do the wrong thing. When we slide over it, we are simply telling that we are not ready to follow Him. And there are many, many aspects in the New Testament that humans, by reading it, by not quite understanding the depth of the meaning of it, they just slide over it, which is fine. We can slowly, step by step, adopt small parts of the Gospels that we really understand, and it speaks to our hearts. Another aspect, such aspect of the Gospels, is that when Christ speaks about divorce, in modern society, when divorce is like a plague, where 50-60% of our married couples get divorced, and another huge portion of the society lives together but it does not even get married, that is a very sore point in our life. And when we read about it, we kind of avoid it. We don't want to even talk about it. But he says if a husband lets the wife go and that wife marries someone else, that is adultery. Can we really agree with it? Not necessarily because it seems like he's talking to us, that we are in that position. The reason for divorces are many, and we cannot generalize this rule. But what Christ is telling us is that from the very beginning, something was wrong. Or in the process of marriage, something has gone deeply wrong. And that's why it has created this chasm between the married couples. And if we follow this first gospel that I mentioned, that we leave everything and we follow Christ, that we put God first in our life, that if our married couples put God first in their lives, not each other, not themselves, not their children or parents or brothers and sisters, but God first, and they dedicate their entire life, our whole life, we say, we give to you, our Lord, then and only then there will be harmony in the society, where we cease from being self-centered, egocentric creatures. We are not even other-centered, but we are God-centered. And when we are God-centered, the pyramid is built properly. Everything falls in its right place when we put God first. When we serve Him first, everybody in the society becomes more happy by the purpose of their life. After a while, when we are egocentric, we lose even the meaning of life. And that is proven by the fact, by the amount of the murders that are done in our schools and streets, by the suicides that are committed by our young generation and even older generation. We have tried to strip off of their minds their religious identity. We have made them into a society of individuals. And there is nothing unhappier, there is nothing sadder than a lonely human being. When we have created a divided society of individuals so that we can control them better, we have created an unhappy society, a society that has lost the meaning of life, because human beings cannot find meaning in isolation. Human beings find meaning in communities. And the community is only formed when we leave our egos and we center our attention on the other. And even that kind of self-centered communities fall apart if the community does not put the attention in God. We enjoy our lives for a while when we leave God, because it seems like we become God ourselves. We are in charge of everything. Of course we are in charge of everything when we live in a culture, in a society like America, where everything is provided. There are services for everything. You don't need a friend or a brother when you're in trouble. You can call 911. And that is fine, and it's a great thing that is available. But you cannot deny the need of a brother and a friend. You cannot deny the need of a parent or a child. But it seems in our society everything has been divided. Even the closest relationship, which is husband and wife, is undergoing this divisive theory, this divisive ideology. You see, in this gospel, Christ says that you have to leave everything. You have to leave your parents, your children, your brothers and sisters, friends, everything in society, and follow me. Take your cross and follow me. But he does not say you can leave your husband or your wife to follow me, because that is a totally different dynamic, totally different kind of relationship. And St. Paul says to those who have converted into Christianity, if their spouses are still pagan, he says, your salvation will cause their salvation. You cannot divorce your husband or your wife based on your beliefs, because you have committed yourself. You have made that bond of eternity, and you have become one body and one flesh and one soul. So this is a different kind of relationship, and Christ pays a very close attention to the bond of marriage. And that's why in the other gospel that I mentioned, he does not find any reason why should couples separate themselves from one another. And today in our society, the reasons are multitude. And some of them are justified by psychologists, some of them aren't. But in the deep, deep cause of this is the individualism, where we are self-centered, we do not pay attention to the other, we are constantly seeking service, we are constantly seeking someone else to please us rather than serving them. This is the meaning of today's gospel, dear brothers and sisters, that in our life we have to make God first, put Him first. Then put everyone else in your life second, and put yourself last. And that's the correct order. And that's what Christ told His disciples to do. Become the servants of everyone. He said when this worldly power demands service, the power of Christ gives service. Our strength is in our weakness. Our weakness is revealed in our service. When we become servants of others, we are becoming strong in Christ. Christ is manifesting Himself in us. He is revealing Himself in our hearts because we are becoming like Him. We are putting our own aprons and serving others. And only then, only when we serve God, we will be united back together, because it is the community of God that is the strongest community. Our churches today are slowly becoming something secular. I don't even know what to call it. It's not even a club anymore. It is people coming together for something. They don't even know what their real reason is. And if the church is getting to that point where Christ is not the center of their attention, that everything that they do does not necessarily serve the cause that Christ brought to this world, the salvation of humanity, the return of human race to the Creator, then we cannot expect much from the secular society. And everybody, in the result, suffers. And we have many, many questions. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Why there are so many wars in the world? Why so many shootings in our streets and in our schools? Why this and why the other thing? We need to reflect upon our lives. We need to look at what our priorities are. So let us today learn from this gospel that we need to take our cross and follow Christ. Cross meaning everything that we have in our lives. Everything that we do is our cross. Everything that we're responsible for in this life, everything that we take care of, everything that relates to us is part of our cross. Let's take everything into one cross and dedicate it to God. Ask Him to sanctify it and return it to us back. He does not need any of it. He does not even need us out of necessity. But He has created us and He does not want to lose us. He will not lose us. He will bring us to Himself. So when we give ourselves and our entire life to Christ, it's not to enslave ourselves to God, but to receive freedom, to be sanctified, to turn into a holy nation and be returned to our society, to our relatives and friends. And that's the way, that's the only way that societies have been made holy, that societies have been illuminated. If you look at the ancient cultures, have all been sanctified by Christianity. Christianity has embraced all cultures and made it holy and returned it to its people. Today is time for us as a society, as a great nation, to give everything we have to God and expect it to be sanctified. And then and only then, happiness and joy will be part of our heart's feelings. Thank you, and I will see you next time.